Finally, getting to high-level spells is every wizard's dream. Every wizard's nightmare is picking the wrong ones. If you're looking for the best ones to pick, then you're in luck, because behind today's secret door, best wizard spells levels 6 through 9. So behind today's secret door, best wizard spells levels 6 through 9. This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussion about Dungeons & Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. Alright, I have started a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel, your help would be greatly appreciated and much needed, and many thanks to Marcelo and Doug for your support. The link will be in the pinned comment and in the description. All right, so just a few criteria here before we get to the actual list. This should be pretty quick, I would think. I'm only considering Player's Handbook spells. First of all, I'm going to rate the top 3 spells at each level. Now, in almost every case, I'm going to give an honorable mention as well, with one exception, which will become apparent. Ideally, I'm trying to always pick a combat spell or damage spell, a control spell and a utility spell, but it doesn't always work out like that. Of course, I'm picking the best spells, but if I can break it down into that kind of a thing, that's what I'm trying to achieve. And lastly, I just want to make one other point here, and that is I am not a fan of damage spells. for especially for wizards, not a fan. And I know that a lot of players love to play damaging spells as a caster. I think it's a horrible waste, generally speaking. But you will find blaster spells here, because the scale of blasting spells that happens from 6 to 9 is altogether different than earlier level play. And for that reason, you have to include them. And of course, I would use any of the blaster spells that I'm going to list here. At this kind of level of play, you generally speaking only have one spell slot for any particular level from 6 through 9. Of course, it doesn't mean you only know one spell for each level. And of course, as a wizard, you could have all of them if you were lucky enough to be able to acquire all of them. But what you prepare is very, very important. And what you decide to utilize that slot on in an adventuring day is very important. So I am really trying to pick what are the very best, in my opinion, of those spells. So that you could be looking at this as simply just saying, in general, I could just take the top one from each of the spell levels and I'd be fine. And I think you would be. But that being said, everybody plays this game differently. People utilize spells differently. And there are several levels, all but one, where I could have put 5 or 6 spells on this list. There are, or maybe even more, quite frankly. Some levels are crowded and it was very, very difficult to make those choices. So if you find that at a particular level, one of the spells didn't make the top 3 that you thought it should, you probably could make a really good case for it. And maybe on another day, I would agree with you and put it up there. They can be that close. In general, the number 1 is what I think is pretty much, in my opinion, uncontested. That's the best spell of the level. And number 2, generally speaking, I think is pretty secure as well, but not always. There's one particular level that is crowded for choice. So those are the criteria. And let's just go ahead and get started here at level 6. So at level 6, now I'm already going to kind of break, I just can't help myself. I'm going to break my rule before I even get into the first selection here. I had this written down, but here I am sitting in front of camera, and I think I'm just making a horrible omission by not including either of these as options, because you should just look at this as a guide. This isn't like the definitive list of what's best. It's what I think is best, but I want you folks to be able to use this as a way of just narrowing down choices so that you can look and find stuff rather easily. So this is the only level I'm going to do this on. I'm going to give 3 honorable mentions here at level 6. There's a lot of spells. I think that's only fair to some of these spells, however. So the first honorable mention of the three is going to be Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron. Now, that may sound kind of surprising. Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron is actually a really interesting spell. And what I like about it in particular is that anytime I can get a spell, and there's another spell that is on this list that on this level's list that of a wow kind of factor to me. When you can cast a spell that you're going to be able to then kind of like hoard and then utilize for later without a time limit is a really great thing. And Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron does just that. Here at this level, you're 11th level at minimum to be able to cast a 6th level spell. So your intelligence modifier is going to be probably 5, which means you'll be able to make 5 uncommon or common potions that you want. And they don't disappear with the cauldron. When the cauldron goes, they stay until you cast the spell again. If they're not used, they are there until you cast the spell again. Now, 5 uncommon potions doesn't sound like all that great of a big deal, and it's not. But as a prep, as a free gimme that you can just give to the group 5 uncommon potions, just at the snap of your fingers, is a really nice bonus for a party to have. It can fill a lot of problems. You could be using it as an emergency heal. I know that sounds really stupid, but if you were in a real pinch, you could use your 6th level spell slot as a wizard. You don't have seal spells as a wizard. This is a way you could solve that problem. And wizards are all about solving problems. So between that and the ability to just tailor make it for utility and preload for the team like that, it's really, really valuable. So it's one that I think you should definitely look at. I'm not saying you should definitely take it. It's an honorable mention. So the next honorable mention is Arcane Gate. Now, I am a huge fan of Dimension Door. This is Dimension Door that lasts for 10 minutes. The range is identical, and you're able to take anybody who goes through that door can go through the other portal. So you have a range of 500 feet teleport that you could take the whole party through, and it could last up to 10 minutes. This could be used for infiltration. It could be used for just simply navigating and overcoming obstacles, any number of things. There's all kinds of things that happen to a D&D party where you're limited to how many people you can actually get and handle and deal with. Arcane Gate solves all of that, at least within 500 feet. So it's an honorable mention. It's definitely one that I would want to have in my spell book. I'm not saying that it would be one of my first picks, but it's one that I would definitely want in my spell book. And then the next honorable mention is Disintegrate. Now, I don't particularly like this spell, but it does do one thing really that's could potentially be very important in a D&D game. It just depends on your DM. And that's how often are you going to be running up against Wall of Force. Now, you're an 11th level character minimum by the time you have 6th level spells, so you yourself have been employing Wall of Force on your DM, and the DM may very well, even though they may not normally do so, they may start wanting to throw it right back in your face and show you what it's like to have to deal with Wall of Force. Well, Disintegrate is your way to deal with that. As a combat spell goes, I'm not a big fan. It's a single target. I don't particularly care for it in that sense. I'd much rather use a control spell. There's fabulous control spells, and if I want damage, I want AoE, generally speaking. But this will do in a pinch, and we can't always have everything. And if you are going to deal with Wall of Force, this is one of the only things you can do to deal with it. All right. So that's the only time we're going to get 3 honorable mentions in one level. All right. Now, at the number 3 position for the level, I have Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. Again, normally not a big blasting fan, but Autoluke's Freezing Sphere is a crazy spell. Autoluke's Freezing Sphere area of effect is a 60-foot radius. That's 12 squares in radius. That's a 24-foot diameter, or 24 square diameter. That's 576 target squares. That is just completely off the charts for any kind of area of effect damage spell that you have heretofore seen. It's so big, in fact, that it's almost too big. If I had one gripe about Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, it's that. There are going to be encounters where you're in too close of quarters to make use of it. But again, you're an 11th level character at this point. By the time you could first take this spell, you've got that in spades. You've got plenty of spells that will deal with that. So I'm not going to hold that against Autolukes. There's going to be plenty of times where you're going to be able to reap the full benefit of that, because anything that's that big, that's the encounter. You're hitting the entire encounter with that spell. This will be a theme because there are many spells here at this level that do just that. But this is the first time that you're getting something like this. Now, its damage is 10d6. That's not all that fantastic. It's fine. It's fine. And they save for half with Constitution. So let's assume that every single target saves. Okay? Just assume that. That's not why you're picking this necessarily, because it would be 35 points of damage on average. That would mean if they save 17.5, 18 points of damage is what they're going to take. But if it was as per normal and it's about half on, half off, then you're going to be looking at about 25 points of damage on average per target, with 576 squares of possible targets. Again, this is the encounter. So if you can put 25 points on average, 17 minimum, 25 points on average to every single target in the encounter, that's great. Now, if it were just that, I would put it here on this list. But then there's something else. This is a minor thing, but it's a bonus. And that is if you are casting this and there is water and there is someone on the surface of the water, anything swimming on the surface of the water, everything on that surface of that water is frozen. No saving throw. They're stuck there. They're not dead or anything like that, but they're stuck there. They're frozen there for a minute. Very minor, but at this level of play, again, you're going to be going into different kinds of places that you didn't go to before as easily because you were afraid to go there if something went wrong. But now you're an 11th level character with 6th level spells. You're going to be going into those kinds of territories. Having water adventures is certainly one of those things. That happens actually much earlier. So you've already been dealing with that in those kind of environments. And now you have a spell that's going to do its great damage in its big area of effect, with the possibility, however small, that you're going to be able to have a very strong control effect thrown in for free. So with that on top of it, yes, what an amazing spell. But there's a third thing, and this may be the greatest thing of all. You can choose to not, once you've cast the spell, you can choose to not actually cast it right then and there, but you make this little bead or ball that when hurled, that ball will then blow up into the Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. Now, it will do that at the end of the 1 minute duration. So you can't just walk around with a bag of these things or anything like that. But you could precast it. But what this does allow you to do is it allows you the flexibility of precasting, or giving it to, like, let's say you took a level in Warlock and have Pact of the Chain. You can precast that before you walk into the known encounter and hand it to the imp. That way that imp's action is Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. That's crazy. You could also hand it to, if you have hirelings, if you have anybody else that could reasonably hurl that thing, they can do that. That is an amazing get. Talk about action economy. Talking about action economy meets spells with how that interacts with the action economy. And this is an amazing must-look-at spell. I would definitely have this in my spell book. Number 2 on the list is Mass Suggestion. Now, in 5th edition, this was the one great spell that the Warlocks got at 6th level, and they've taken that away. Mass Suggestion is a great spell. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's suggestion en masse. And Suggestion is an amazing spell. Talk about flexibility. And when you're talking about mind control effectively en masse like this, incredibly powerful. This would definitely be on my list. This would be one of the must-takes on my list. I prefer control in this type of finesse over damage, but I would still want Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, don't get me wrong. But if it were between this and Mass Suggestion, I would take Mass Suggestion, which is why it's 2/3. And at number 1, we have another spell that also deals with this idea of precasting, but this spell precasts in such a way that it trivializes what you can do with Autolux Freezing Sphere in that way, and that is Contingency. So Contingency, if you don't know what the spell does, it is essentially you cast a spell, you cast Contingency, and then you cast a spell on yourself that can target yourself, and this spell will go off based on the trigger that you pronounce for yourself when you cast the Contingency spell. So when my hit points fall to 50% or lower, or 25% or lower, or whatever, that could be a good marker for you to do if you want an emergency get out of jail free kind of card that'll just pop in. The flexibility of Contingency and the way that it's there, because you don't have to cast it. It'll just go off. So any of the requirements, like let's say one of the contingencies could be if I'm ever bound and gagged, if I'm underwater for over a minute, or whatever the case may be, whatever you are expecting that might happen in the near future, you could cast Contingency and then the spell that you want to have answer for that contingency, and bingo. And that lasts for 10 days. So for a player that, talk about what I really love about these spells is these spells are the ones where you really feel like a big-time wizard. And of course they should, because you're becoming a big-time wizard. But boy, do these pay off and make you feel that way. And Contingency is one of those, because you have to use a little bit of projection forward, and you have to activate the frontal lobe and think about what the future might bring for yourself. So yeah, great spell. Love Contingency. All right, at level 7. Now I'm going to give you the honorable mention. I believe the honorable mention could just as easily go into the number 3 slot as easily as it could go into the honorable mention. It's a very strong spell. It deserves to be here, but in the end, I think that the number 3 spell is just overall just going to be more useful. But the spell here is Reverse Gravity. Now, Reverse Gravity is so good that I could easily put it in the number 2 list here. And that is saying quite something, because if you know anything about what is likely to be sitting here at the number 2 spot, you would think, well, then why is it not at the number 3 spot at least? And that's because it does have one kind of little bit of a problem. Reverse Gravity affects a 50-foot radius. That's a 20 square diameter, so you're now talking about 400 squares, which is, again, this is even big encounters, that's the encounter. Only rarely are either of those spells, Autolux or Reverse Gravity, not going to hit everything in the encounter. It would have to be some big outdoor encounter and dealing with vast quantities of creatures, or just creatures that are so scattered out throughout the map that they're going to be real outliers. In almost every case, this will be a spell that will hit the entire encounter. Now, it's a 50-foot radius, 100-foot cylinder. Anything that's in that area, gravity is reversed and they begin falling upward. They just fall upward immediately. If there's a fixed object that they can try and grab on and get a hold of, they can make a dexterity saving throw to avoid that. But that's all they get, and that has to be there. Now, in some cases, that's going to happen. There's going to be a few targets that'll have that opportunity. But in general, this is a no saving throw kind of spell. And then they fall upwards. So once they hit to whatever falling upwards means, now if they hit anything along the way, they take the falling damage that they would have taken per 10 feet, which is a d6 per 10 feet, and then they hit it. Then they're there for the duration of the spell, and they're hovering. And at the end, of course, the spell would end and they would fall. So now, what this spell is doing is it's a control spell reducing every creature that cannot fly to a speed of 0. No saving throw. Further, they have no real means of ever being able to close any kind of distance with you. So let's say you got them up to the maximum of 100 feet high. You're now talking about some real serious range problems for even if they have a ranged attack. There's going to be plenty of those creatures where that's going to be a hard range for them to pick. And because they're immobile, you're going to be able to pick the spots that you want from ranged and hit them whenever you like to. So it's an enormous no save kind of will-imposing kind of spell that also can potentially do 10d6 of damage at least if you get the 100 feet. Plus, if they hit something solid but would still fall upward, then they'd be taking multiple points of damage. So what's the problem? Well, it's the 100-foot thing, to be quite honest with you, because there's going to be plenty of times where you're in situations where the ceiling is not going to be all that high. I'm not saying they're going to be like modern 10-foot ceilings or anything like that. There's going to be caves that, mine kind of situations, but you wouldn't cast it there. Now, just to put this in reference, though, if you were to go into a cathedral, and if you're envisioning those kind of structures, then they easily have 100 feet. Notre Dame's cathedral is 115 feet inside. So, and there's plenty of cathedrals and structures like that in the real world, and we're talking about fantasy D&D world where the architecture could be off the charts. So there's going to be plenty of places, of course there's going to be outside by itself, where this is going to work, but there's going to be plenty of situations where it will kind of work. Then there's the problem where the gravity is flipped in reverse, and it does say they hover there, but if they are actually hitting a ceiling, there's going to be the chance of them being able to move, crawl across the ceiling, however the DM's going to rule it. I mean, it says that they're hovering. If they're hovering just in the air and they have no means of propulsion, then or anything to grab or push off on, then their speed is 0. But if there's ways for them to grab and manipulate, I'm sure the DM will allow them to move. So there's that. And let's say we're talking about a 30-foot ceiling, and you put them 30 feet up in the air, and that's great. That's really good. But 30 foot is also a very different range for those that have ranged combat. So it's still a great spell, which is why it's here. But its efficacy will vary based upon the ceiling that you're dealing with. So that's why it has to be here in the honorable mention. But boy, oh boy, is this a great spell. So at the number 3 spot, this is actually kind of a boring spell to pick, but it is so useful. I don't think you can really argue with it being either here or in the honorable mention, and that's teleport. I love teleports. There's nothing boring about them. It's just there's so many different kinds of teleport spells, but this is, again, one of those situations where you can just get anybody in or out. Incredibly flexible, takes the whole party, generally speaking, with you. It just solves a lot of problems. It lets you get into places, get out of places. Just a great, 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 great spell. So, and also one of those spells that really does make you feel like a wizard. And boy, so does reverse gravity. That really you're affecting gravity now. So you are really a big time wizard. And both these spells, I think, really do that. And that's actually true for every spell here at 7th level. Generally speaking, throughout the spells I'm going to be discussing, but these are some of the best spells that were number 2 and 1 are really something. So at number 2, I have Force Cage. Now, a lot of you are jumping into the comments right now and you're telling me what an idiot I am. I don't know what I'm talking about, blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, I might be an idiot, but I do kind of know what I'm talking about. And what I'm addressing here is the level and the reality of play. You're an 11th level character, minimum. Or I'm sorry, you're a 13th level character, minimum. 13th level character. You've had Wall of Force, and you probably have Wall of Force on your list. And you've been using it. Now, Force Cage is better than Wall of Force, which is why it's here at number 2. But if you had to pick between this and what is at number 1, you would pick number 1, I would hope, every time. So as great as Force Cage is, it's also kind of expendable because what you really need it to do, Wall of Force does. Force Cage allows it to be done a little bit better than Wall of Force. But Wall of Force will do the trick very, very nicely. And that's a 5th level spell. This isn't ripping on Force Cage. I have it at number 2. There's just one that I think where there is no spell that does what that spell does. It is clearly better in every possible way other than the problems that it can create for itself. And that, at number 1, is Simulacrum. Now, you want to feel like a big-time wizard? Simulacrum. Because Now you're reaching into the Rick and Morty kind of territory where you've got clones that, you can make of yourself essentially with Simulacrum. Having something that has your battery of spells available to it, unbelievably powerful. Now there's all the requirements and all the problems with Simulacrum that it has. I'm not saying it's a photocopy of you. But it's like that photocopy that's been photocopied. It's faded, but you can still read it. And what it does is plenty good enough. Just a power level spell. One that, again, you have arrived as a wizard. And then we get to 8th level, and I wish I could give you honorable mentions, but 8th level is very much like 4th level is famously, where there's a couple of good spells and the rest are like, eh. So, listing them as spells that I would have a must-have. These were the 3 that I think are really worth taking. And it's too bad. There is no spell nearly as powerful as Simulacrum on this list, in these top 3. There's really not one that's as good as Force Cage's one. It's one that's close. But, so it's a weird thing how these spells have always laid out to me, because 8th level has always been kind of a dead level. At number 3, I have Demiplane. Now, Demiplane is one of those spells that does make you feel like a big-time wizard, because you are creating pocket dimensions that even when you close them, they're there forever. So when you create a demiplane, you're going to be able to start creating networks of demiplanes and hiding different things and all. Talk about how powerful this is in the hands of the wrong player, meaning the right player. And it really is kind of a staggering thing. But it isn't. It's a clever use, and it can translate into real power, but only obliquely. But there's going to be that person that comes up with such a creative idea to use with Demiplane that you're just going to stand on your head and go, wow. And you could only do that with something like Demiplane. So if you just consider something like the Genie's Vessel from 5th edition, that's kind of like a Demiplane, but it's better than a Demiplane, which is what makes the Genie so incredibly great. But this has its advantages too, in that it's always there. You can create many, many, many of them. And so they could serve as, storage. They could serve as prisons of a sort. You would have to be very careful in how you manage it, but you could use them as such. Or just as a hiding place for a little while. So there's all kinds of things you can do with Demiplane. I have no problem with this here at number 3 at all. You could make it number 2. You could even theoretically make it number 1, because number 1, I think, has to be at number 1. But any one of these you could put them in almost any order. And number 2 is Dominate Monsters. So Dominate Monster is both as good and as bad as you probably think it is. So you are affecting virtually anything that you can target with the spell, but they do get a save, and then they get other saves. But you're going to get them to do what you want. So this is like a turnover in football or other sports. You're taking the creature of the enemy and then flipping it on the enemy. So very, very powerful, very effective when it works. But here by this level, 8th level, you're a 15th level character now, you've got all kinds of methods to be able to start reducing the ability to make saves. Somebody in the party will, or if you don't. And your save DC is going to be crazy high. So it's a wisdom saving throw. So, picking something that will be vulnerable to that. It's the charmed condition. So there's that kind of other problem. There's going to be creatures that are immune to it. But all in all, a solid, great pick. I do like Demiplane better than Dominate Monster. Frankly, I would not necessarily always want Dominate Monster in my spellbook. But it is the only spell at this level that I can recommend for combat, which is why it's here. And number 1 here at 8th level, we have Clone. Clone is really one of the big time wizard spells from AD&D forward. The problem with Clone essentially is that it's doing nothing really better than a Raise Dead spell would do. In fact, it's worse than Raise Dead in some respects, because Raise Dead, you have all your stuff. With Clone, your soul goes back into wherever you've got that clone body. But it's a spell that's already precast. So if you're out of ammunition and you don't have the spell slot to be able to raise dead or revivify or anything like that, it's a way of not dying that you have in your pocket at all times, which makes it invaluable. And wizards don't have raise dead or revivify or anything like that. So this is their one spell that they've got that can keep them alive. And, it's very Rick and Morty. There's several ones that I'm picking here on this list, very Rick and Morty. And if you don't know, Rick and Morty, the Dan Harmon is famously a D&D player. So, Rick is an 18th level wizard or whatever, for sure. So very, very Rick and Morty. And so for all those reasons that I mentioned, and a little bit because of Rick and Morty, I have it here at number 1. And then we get to 9th level. Now, the honorable mention here, this spell has been around since AD&D days, and I feel actually every single spell here on this list here at 9th level has all been here since AD&D days. So, but the spell essentially does things that you already can do. And so that's one knock against it. It's still a great spell, and that spell is Prismatic Wall. I have nothing really to comment about it. But Prismatic Wall does essentially what things that you can already do more or less. And so for that reason, I'm putting it here in the honorable mention. At number 3, we have Meteor Swarm. Kind of an odd pick again for me, another blasting spell, but this may be, obviously the mother of all blasting spells. This is where you're like throwing around, megaton warheads. I mean, if you're inclined to have that be your epitome of what being a big wizard is, well, there you go, Meteor Swarm. The amount of damage that you roll per target for Meteor Swarm is insanity. The area of effect is insanity. And it's so targetable in as much as you can target with, tactical nuclear warheads. It's an incredibly powerful spell. And if this is your vision of what the big time wizard looks like, nothing can do that better than Meteor Swarm. By the time I get to 9th level, I can't imagine that I would ever really want this on my spell list just because I know I can do without it. And if I just take it number 2 on my list, I'm probably going to be fine for every combat for my 9th level casting. Number 2 could easily be number 1 in this list. And we all know what number 1 is. But you can very easily make the argument that number 2 should be number 1 because number 1 can't do what number 2 does, which is really weird. I mean, it theoretically can, but you run some big problems by doing that. Number 2 is Time Stop. Now, if you've ever played Magic the Gathering, in the original cards that were considered to be broken, there was the Power 12 or the Power 13? I forget however many number it was. It's been a long time. But one of them, I think it was Time Walk, was the name of the spell. And you cast that spell, and you got an extra turn. And it was broken, and everybody knew it. And that's what they were. Time Walk was just this incredibly, incredibly powerful spell. And it was a very cheap spell to cast in terms of the mana costs and all that type of stuff. But the point is, whenever you can get another turn, that's a really big deal. As much as we go on, and certainly I do, about initiative for wizards and casters, getting multiple turns in a row, yeah, there's some restrictions to it, but you cast Time Stop and you're adding 1 to a D4, and that's the number of consecutive turns that you take. Now, if you can't win that fight as a 17th level wizard minimum with that many turns in a row, you've got problems. It's game over with Time Stop. Over. It's an auto win. You finish it. It's over. Whatever you want to have happen happens in a scenario like that. So yeah, it's unbelievably powerful spell. And again, now you're affecting time, gravity, time. Well, that's crazy. And of course, number 1, we all know, is Wish. Now, my point being that the number 1 spell can't even do the things that the number 2 and the number 3 spell can on this list, or really anything on this 9th level list, is because the only safe way to use Wish is if you replicate an 8th level spell, any 8th level spell or lower. Anything outside of that, other than a few other little things, and you're just going to start running into some DM problems. And if your DM is at all inclined to monkey paw a problem, you will wish you had a different spell other than wish. that is the curse of wish. So I'm not saying it's a bad spell. Obviously, it's here at number 1 because it has to be. But I personally would feel much safer having time stop than wish. But also knowing that it's anything 8th level, anything in Dungeons and Dragons at 8th level or lower, that's such a hugely flexible thing that I think I would probably go ahead and take it just for the flexibility of it. But I mean, in terms of raw power for that combat, time stop, I feel much more secure, me personally, than wish. But wish is obviously great. It's wonderful. It's magnificent. There's no way to really describe power gaming with wish. I mean, it's kind of what you think it is. The one thing that I think I would do with wish is I would probably cast Simulacrum with it. Now, you want to talk about wishing for more wishes? You kind of did, but you cast another spell. That's the only point that I really got there for you. So wish is just, yeah, it's an amazing, this is the pinnacle, the book says, so it is what it is. So that's the list for the wizards. All right. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.